But let's not go into that discussion on any great detail. Instead, let's just talk about what the ramifications would result as a result of implementing the fair tax. There is an indication based upon studies by economists at MIT and Harvard that we would see a 25% decline in interest rates. With your entire paycheck, your house payments would be less, but you wouldn't get a deduction. You wouldn't get a mortgage interest deduction. There would be no government subsidy. And so you're thinking, wait a minute, what's going to happen? Oh gosh, you know, that's going to really be an onerous burden. Well, actually, in Canada, they have never had the government subsidizing the purchase of homes. As a result, their home purchase rate or ownership rate has been on the order of 67%. Here in the United States, where we've had government subsidizing it, it's been a whopping 68%. Big whoop. So forget about that. In fact, something on the order of a third to 40% of U.S. citizens who pay income taxes don't even itemize, so they're not taking the deduction anyway. And as far as charitable contributions actually go up as the economy improves. And that's one thing we would see with this. Talk about a shot in the arm. Talk about a stimulus. We're talking about a permanent stimulus. But as far as charitable contributions, again, 2/3 to 40% or rather a third to 40% don't itemize. And so the bulk of charitable contributions are not based upon the tax implications, but instead it's the goodness of one's heart and also how well they feel with respect to how the economy's doing. And if you're getting your entire paycheck, you're going to feel like spending some money. Now, under the current system, there is something called the Earned Income Tax Credit. Well, under the fair tax, we have something similar. We have a prebate that we provide. We pay to everybody, regardless of your income. You don't have to report income as far as the fair tax goes. For Social Security, that's another matter. Yeah, you have to keep track of that to get your social, well, as if anybody here will ever get any Social Security payments, but anyway, another day, another time. But with regards to the prebate, everybody is going to get money deposited electronically to their account at the beginning of each month. Case in point, family of four, something on the order of $525 each month. It'll be adjusted for inflation. Basically, it offsets the taxes that you would pay on the necessities of life. So in essence, let's say somebody is down there in the 15% tax bracket right now. Under the fair tax, because they would get that prebate, they could be spending on the order of $40,000 or so per year and still have only about 11.5% rate of taxation. So that's going to be much less. They're going to be in better shape. In fact, the bottom third would see probably a good something on the order of 11 to maybe 15% more disposable income as a result of the fair tax being passed. But let's look at corporations. Because they're not having to file tax returns, they're not having to pay taxes on their profits, they can compete internationally because you strip out that embedded tax as a result of having to pay the overhead of federal taxes, having to pay the Social Security share that they pay for their employees. You strip that out, they can compete more favorably in the global marketplace. Also under the fair tax, we would see illicit activities being taxed because right now they're not paying taxes. Something on the order of $1 to $2 trillion goes untaxed in this country each year. That, in combination with the fraud that takes place under our current system, results in us paying about 30% more than our fair share under the federal income tax system. So that would no longer be the case. Plus, we spend something on the order of $250 to $275 billion each year just to file tax returns, and another $250 billion or so is spent each year trying to reduce our tax liability. Under the fair tax, all that could be plowed back into the economy. And something on the order of $10 to $12 trillion have left our shores to avoid taxation. A lot of that money would come back home. you would have to hide under a rock as a result to avoid some of those fantastically well-paying jobs that would result as a result of all that money coming back to our shores. We would become a tax haven for the rest of the world. All the countries around the world would be inclined to pour their money back into the United States in order to take advantage of investments that would go tax-free. A couple other points: the stock market would soar. We'd be talking about, instead of a 3% growth rate, probably on the order of 6, 9, 12, maybe even as much as a 14% annual rate of growth. My major concern is maybe the government would end up getting too much money, but that's another thing. We've got this figured into the legislation such that they would have to review each year and see if they're not getting too much money, and as a result, adjust the tax rate down. Also, there would be required a supermajority to raise the tax rate, and every time you bought something, you're going to see the taxes that you pay. Generally people don't see that on a regular basis. As a result, it just kind of goes unnoticed. One other major point too is the fact that we would be talking about a third or so less tax returns, because the entity that sells the product or the service is going to be submitting that money to the federal government. And so there is a lot less of a challenge to police. Also, less fraud would take place. Right now, it only takes one person to commit fraud under the federal income tax system. Under the fair tax, it takes two: the entity selling the product or the service and the entity buying. So, much less fraud. Thank you.
Now, our next gentleman is someone you're truly going to enjoy. You have seen, the fair tax. Now, our next gentleman will be talking about the flat tax, but he also represents another group called FreedomWorks. Now, there are two great grassroots organizations in the state of North Carolina. One is FreedomWorks, and the other is Americans for Prosperity. And I encourage all of you to find out all you can about these groups, because no matter how much work Civitas or the Locke Foundation or a lot of these people do, without having people on the ground to knock on doors and remind people what's happening out there, nothing really takes place. And I've enjoyed getting to know both groups very well over the past 5 years. Hugh Webster, our next speaker, was born and raised on his family's farm in rural Caswell County. Hugh is not what you would call a polished politician, and I really do agree with that statement. He is blunt, brash, and firm in his straightforward, common-sense convictions. Hugh has never been accused of pandering to political correctness, but has earned the reputation of one unafraid to tell the truth and stand by his convictions. That straightforward, common-sense manner served the taxpayers of North Carolina well while he served in the state's General Assembly from 1995 through 2006. During those 12 years, he never once voted in favor of a state budget that included a tax increase, and he never voted in favor of legislation that went against the provisions set out by the Constitution. That means he voted very rarely for anything. That's my added line. In Raleigh, Hugh stood firm in defense of state constitution and protected the wallets of taxpayers. He is representing FreedomWorks tonight, and he is their poster child for the flat tax. And now I bring you Hugh Webster.
I've been paying taxes for a long, long time. I turned 65 a few days ago. They say that when you get old, your memory's the second thing to go. I forgot what was first. But talking about a flat tax, every time I pay taxes, I feel flat after that. Do you? Do you feel flat? My wife, come April the 15th, and we're doing, by the way, y'all know what I used to do for a living. I used to make a living doing tax returns and accounting and financial planning. And that was before politics. And now I just kind of go into the office and pay the bills for somebody else. I don't make a living. My wife made me a living while I spent 12 years in the North Carolina Senate. And I gotta say, Neil, that I never enjoyed hard work, but I found it always interesting and sometimes fun. And Marilyn, I'm sure you find it the same way, don't you? And I'm proud to have both of y'all in there. And if I miss a legislator back there, that's because my eyes are fading too.